Happy Friday, everyone. Starting our last unit of the first term, Unit 4 here, is dealing with cell energy. And so this is a good segue right from the unit we just left, talking about the cell in general. And now we're going to dig in a little bit to some of the organelles associated. So ultimately, we want you to understand the structure of chloroplast, but more importantly, the function. How do these things work to make energy for cells? But before we do that, just a little review of yesterday's information, hopefully that you started with. And here we are with one of those macromolecules, right? Remember the proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. So nucleic acids here, one you maybe have heard of before, but it's adenosine triphosphate. Remember, this is the one I like to think of as being the dollar bill of the cell. The rest of the structure here, right, is made of a sugar. It's got a nitrogen base. But ultimately, this bond right here is the one we're interested in. This bond that exists between these two phosphates is the energy that can be used by a cell. Okay, so a very important molecule in almost all cell types. So we're going to talk a little bit about ATP now, but I want you to recognize that we're going to be talking about it throughout, right? So ATP plays a big role in photosynthesis, which has to do with cellular energy, and it plays a big role in cellular respiration, which has to do with cellular energy. So it's really one of these sort of linchpin type of molecules. And really, why this molecule is so useful is that it can be reused over and over again. So it can go from ADP, diphosphate, right, two phosphates, to ATP, triphosphates. We don't really care much about the rest of it because you can see it's all very similar except for this bond, right? So when you make bonds, you store energy. When you break bonds, you release energy. So ADP, right, the energy has already been broken. It's already been released. You can actually break this other bond and have an AMP, but that's not beyond. We don't need to talk about that. But the point being, here is the bond energy. How do we turn an ADP into an ATP? Right? There has to be energy coming from somewhere. That's where photosynthesis comes in. But a little review of terms, hopefully you recall from 7th grade, but if not, from certainly yesterday, you looked at some of the root words. Auto, just like in automatic car, right? Auto means self. Troph means eating or feeding, to eat. Hetero means different, and again, troph there. So an autotroph literally means self-feeding. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's an organism that can make its own energy, right? It feeds itself. A heterotroph, like that's us, right? The rest of us. We don't get to make our own energy, so we have to consume ultimately autotrophs. Right? A little bit of review of food chains and ecosystem type stuff. So, how do autotrophs feed themselves? They do so in a process known as photosynthesis. And again, focus on your root words here. Photo is light. Syn, put together. So photosynthesis is literally to put together with light. Ultimately, the process of photosynthesis, chemically speaking, makes glucose first, right? An incredibly important biological molecule. But ultimately, the energy in that glucose has to be converted into ATP energy. So photosynthesis is the beginning, right? Probably, arguably, the most important chemical process on the planet. The rest of us wouldn't be alive without it. So how does it work? Photosynthesis uses, of course, energy of the sun, and it's converting a couple of more basic molecules into higher energy molecules. And remember, chemistry is about rearranging atoms and bonds. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. So in the water, And in the carbon dioxide, right, as those get rearranged and moved around, it's still the same atoms. It's just that the bonds get rearranged and energy gets added, right? And you get sugar and oxygen as your products. So how does that work? Where is that happening? Here is the equation, right? And again, matter not being created or destroyed, you have to have balanced amounts. So if you look over here, right, how many C's do you have here? Well, you got to have just as many over here. How many oxygens do you have over here? You got to have just as many over here, right? So when you add all the ones up over here, the reason you have 6 CO2 and 6 H2O is because you have to match the number over here, C6H12O6. So there's your glucose. And then this oxygen is a nice byproduct. So where is this work done, right? Structure and function, right? So the structures are the organelles, chloroplasts. We're going to talk about mitochondria. These are very related type organelles, but in this case, and when we're talking about photosynthesis, we're talking about chloroplasts. There's a lot going on here, but a lot of the same stuff that we're already aware of, right? These things have membranes, right? The chloroplasts. They have chemicals inside of them, known as chlorophyll, right? In fact, that's where they get their green color. So chlorophyll actually literally means green leaf. Chloro meaning green, phyll meaning leaf. So the reason that a leaf is green is because of the chlorophyll, which exists inside of a chloroplast. There are two major types of chlorophyll, A and B, that we concern ourselves with. And you can see here, if light isn't absorbed, right, here it's reflected, right? So the reason you see green right here in the middle is because chlorophyll A and B aren't using green light. They use reds and they use blues. So your reds and blue lights are the ones that activate the chlorophyll pigment to start a whole process called photosynthesis. So all these wavelengths from the sun, right, full spectrum of light, hits a leaf, and a lot of that gets used, and then the green is reflected, right? So it's not being used. You might imagine if you shined a green light, a green light on a leaf, it wouldn't make photosynthesis happen. Okay, so digging into the structures here a little bit, and there's a lot. I don't expect you to know everything, but let's look at some of the parts here. So the chloroplasts are little organelles here. So here's a leaf, and then take a cell out of that leaf, and then inside, right, of the leaf of the cell, the plant cell inside the leaf are the chloroplasts, right? And inside of those are smaller structures. This is where the chlorophyll exists in these little green pancake looking things, right, called the thylakoids. And then around them is a fluid. I like to think of it as sort of like the syrup surrounding the little green pancakes, called the grana. So what's happening? There's a little closer shot of it there. So the chloroplast, right, we're looking at here, which of course is inside of a plant cell, which is inside of a leaf, right? This is sort of the solar panel of plants, the leaf. And this is where the work is being done. So the thylakoid membranes, again, the little green pancakes, is where the chlorophyll exists, right? The pigments, chlorophyll A and B. Surrounding them is where another portion of photosynthesis takes place. That's the stroma. So this material surrounding the little green pancakes. So just another view of it there. You can see it has two membranes. I don't care that you know that. The main things I want you to know are the thylakoids and the stroma. So really, this picture kind of indicates everything I'd like you to know. And we're going to talk about photosynthesis. We're going to break it down into two parts, right? Some people call it the light and dark reaction. Some people call it the light dependent and then the light independent reactions. So we're going to talk about the reactions that take place in the thylakoid, right, with the chlorophyll, and then we're going to talk about the reactions, the chemical reactions that take place in the stroma, the dark reactions. So that's sort of your introduction to photosynthesis, right? What autotrophic organisms do to make their own food. And when we say to make their own food, they're making glucose. So photosynthesis is using light to make glucose. And somehow it's done in these structures. That's what we need to be aware of now, the thylakoid and the stroma, right? Inside these chloroplasts. That's where you need to be right now. So we're going to look in a little more detail in today's lesson that you'll be working on at Leaf Anatomy. There's some PDF pages linked to Schoology for you to utilize for this. But this is looking at a cross-section of a leaf, and I'd like you to finish up the vocabulary on that, because the more we understand about structures, the more we can understand how they work, how they function, right? That's sort of our goal here. All right, see you next time, everybody. Take care.